Hello, everyone. This is Valeria Franco, and today I have a very special guest with me, Professor Eli Somer. Welcome, Professor.
Pleasure to be here.
So, Professor Sommer, you have been the first who have studied maladaptive daydreaming in 2002. And so today I would like to talk with you to have a better understanding on this problem. I have asked my online communities if they had some question for you. And so I have gathered here the most interesting ones.
All right.
So the first one, is maladaptive daydreaming a recent disorder or has it always existed?
Well, I don't think that disorders develop suddenly out of nowhere. I mean, this is part of the human condition. To be daydreaming is something normal that over 90% of people do it every day. Here we're talking about a special trait that has been defined in 2002, has been identified and defined in 2002, a special trait that can lead to an overuse, to an excessive use. So my belief is that it's been there all along. It's not, since it has not been identified and defined well, it's probable that people were misdiagnosed or were simply not identified correctly, and that people were sort of embarrassed to talk about it because many people with this condition who I have talked to told me that they thought that they were the only people in the world who have it.
Yes, it's so true.
Now we give it a name, and our community is forming, like the community that you are leading in Italy, and I hope that together we will have a voice, and together with scientific evidence, that we will have a voice that will convince the main classification books to include this disorder in someday in the future.
Yes, so in the past, you think it was covered by other diagnoses?
It always existed, but it is very similar to, it has some overlap and similarities to other disorders. First of all, many people who have this problem are have depression, have anxiety, have other issues. So it's most probable that people came to their doctors, presented their concerns, and were treated for other existing disorders. But it is also possible that the symptoms were given another diagnosis, were seen differently, because mental health professionals, they use the criteria and the diagnostic categories that they are familiar with to understand what they are seeing in front of them. So, for example, I could imagine that someone describes to their doctor that they have, they see all kind of scenarios in their mind with people talking and interacting and so on. So to a naive mental health professional, this may sound, for example, like hallucinations in schizophrenia. And I have been told by some individuals that this is a diagnosis they have received in the past, while my impression was that it was that they were never suffered from schizophrenia, who has many other issues that are not present at all in maladaptive daydreaming.
All right. So the next one, are maladaptive daydreamers born this way, or do they become like that after a specific life event or traumatic event?
It's a classical question of what influences mental health issues, genetics or environment. And always the answer is always a combination of both. So the evidence that we have is that people we have diagnosed as meeting the suggested diagnostic criteria for maladaptive daydreaming report that they've always had this problem. that since they can remember themselves, or since childhood, they remember engaging in extensive fantasies. So my impression is that it's something people are born with, this ability to fantasize with great clarity, with a lot of vividness, with great detail. This is a special ability that some people have. It is also possible that it is hereditary, meaning that the likelihood of it being in first degree families is perhaps bigger or larger than among strangers. So I think it is an innate, possibly a genetic condition that people can get addicted to, but since it is so rewarding, it is so pleasurable to have it, it's possible that people with depression or with anxiety or with social anxiety or with bad memories or with stressful environment like conflict or child abuse circumstances, people who have this ability and are surrounded by stressful circumstances, it is possible that they are more likely to use this fantasy to calm themselves down, to distract from the emotional pain. So you can see how a trait that is born can become very useful, particularly since it is so pleasurable. It is so rewarding. So it can become useful as a coping mechanism to address stress and emotional pain. And indeed, our research shows that childhood abuse, for example, is more prevalent among maladaptive daydreaming. Although you don't need to have childhood abuse, a history of abuse to develop this. Individuals who have gone through very difficult childhood circumstances and have this ability, of course, will use it to dissociate, to distract, to comfort themselves from existing distress.
If you have a problematic life, you are more likely to get addicted to it. Exactly. Otherwise, maybe you're just an immersive daydreamer.
Exactly. You're using the term that we like to use for the trait, immersive daydreaming. So, and that in itself is not a problem, of course. What makes immersive daydreaming a problem is when, as you, again, a term that you introduced in our discussion now, when people become addicted to it, when they lose control over it.
All right. So can maladaptive daydreaming be affected by a sort of adrenaline addiction due to the need to cause ourselves a sense of euphoria? And if that is the case, could it have a physical dysfunction origin?
We don't know. If I start with your last question, we don't know that. You are actually asking, are the brains of individuals with maladaptive daydreaming or immersive daydreaming different in some way from the brains of people who are unable to daydream very vividly? I would assume the answer is positive, that the brains are different, but we don't know what mechanisms work differently, and for that we would need to do research with brain imaging, with the brain scans, to find out what areas of the brain light up during daydreaming that is not immersive compared to daydreaming that is immersive. And this kind of research will also answer the first part of your question. Are reward mechanisms activated in the brain that explain the addiction that some people experience? What we know from the reports of individuals that we've interviewed and we've talked to, and from reading the online conversations of individuals with maladaptive daydreaming, is that in many, many cases, life in the inner world, life in a fantasy world, is much more exciting, much more rewarding than the external real life. And this is, of course, because one is the director, the film director of the inner movie. One can, and since it feels real, people have a sense of presence in these fantasies. The possibilities are endless. So one can really create an idealized world full of love and excitement and wish fulfillment. And if that feels real, it is frankly very understandable why people would prefer to stay in the fantasy. Unfortunately, it's sometimes at the expense of real life obligations that people have to take care of your health, to take care of your hygiene, of your house, of your school obligation, of your work obligation, of your social obligations. So if this becomes at the expense of these obligations, then we're talking about a problem.
Yeah. And how can we tell maladaptive daydreaming from regular fantasy in children, especially when they are very young?
Well, first of all, children are indeed more capable of daydreaming vividly than adults. We see it in the animal world. In the animal world, we can see, for example, if you watch National Geographic movies, so the example I use is of the cheetah standing on the termite mound, observing, scanning the horizon, and her cubs are in a fantasy world pretending to do some hunting, and they are chasing each other and biting each other, not viciously, but they are practicing all sort of hunting and other skills that are necessary for their survival. But the mother cannot afford to do that because that would be unsafe. So the mother is anchored. She has lost this ability or doesn't use it, and is anchored in reality, scanning the environment, protecting her cubs, while her cubs are in fantasy world. They don't pay attention to this. So we can. So this is an ability probably prevalent among children who use it to practice and to sort of regulate their feelings, but also prepare for their development. And we lose it. We lose it as we grow. So what was the question about childhood?
So how can we tell if the child has a problem?
Right. So first of all, of course, we are much more tolerant about this condition when children are concerned, because a child may tell us, for example, about an imaginary friend, and that will be very normal. If an adult tells us that he or she has an imaginary friend, then, by the way, for me, it's not a big issue unless it interferes with functioning and causes distress. But that would be unusual, more unusual. So the question is, so I suggest that we use the same criteria for psychopathology that we use for adults. And the criteria are, does this behavior cause distress, emotional suffering? And or does this behavior, mental behavior, cause dysfunction? Does it interfere? Does it impair the responsibility and the daily obligations of the child to be part of the family, to go to school, to study and to concentrate? So if the answer is negative for this question, the child is happy and is capable of socializing, capable of attending school and concentrating and so on, then it shouldn't be regarded as a problem. Then it's part of normal childhood behavior. On the other hand, if the child does, for example, attract criticism or ridicule, because a lot of these behavior are associated with stereotypical movement, for example. Some of these children would act out their fantasies, so they would talk like some of the adult maladaptive daydreamers. They would talk out loud, they move their mouth or some other body part. So this may look strange to some other children, and children sometimes can be cruel in their criticism. So if the child is happy about it, but is attracting social isolation and ridicule, then it's better to work with the child to control this better. So again, so to summarize, let's use the two criteria for mental health, for psychopathology: distress or emotional suffering. Does it cause it, yes or no? And does it interfere with normal functioning?
Yes, very clear.
Good.
Very clear. So the next question, this is peculiar. Do maladaptive daydreaming requires visual imaginary, or can it happen also in people who can't have visual images?
You know, to be able to answer such a question, we need to do research. So I guess the question is, can people who can't visualize very clearly, but they can imagine sounds very clearly, can they become maladaptive daydreamers? Yeah, if the person immerses him or herself in, for example, music, and imagines music to the point where they are not functioning, they're not interacting with the external world, then it is a sort of a fantasy that is not visual. But then let me raise another interesting issue. Are people who are visually impaired, who are blind, do they have a fantasy world?
That's interesting. Do they?
I think that they do, but again, it's a question that requires research. I think that they do, of course, because they experience the world differently, not through visual images, but through sensations, through somatic memories, through auditory memories. So, and in fact, I have one case of a person who is legally blind who has maladaptive daydreaming.
Oh.
Yes.
That's impressive.
I'm working with her. So it is possible without the capacity to visualize, to engage in fantasy that involves other senses.
Okay, so what do we know about maladaptive daydreaming and food? Some people tell they don't eat while they are daydreaming because they don't want to feel their body. Is there a connection or between the relation with food and maladaptive daydreaming?
A lot of these questions are excellent. Why am I saying that they're excellent? Because we don't know the answers to them. So these are questions to be investigated because the field is very young. But first of all, we do know that the fantasy in certain cases of maladaptive daydreaming is so rewarding that people prefer to do that than meet their physiological needs. So people sometimes prefer the fantasy to rather than sleeping. They prefer to engage in their daydreaming. They prefer the daydreaming to relationships and even sex. And some people prefer their fantasies to eating and to waste time on eating because the experiences inside are so much more fun. But what you are describing, the way the question was phrased, is very interesting to me because it indicates that some people need to lose touch with their bodies in order to have a perfect fantasy, which is a very intriguing, very interesting comment, and maybe suggests that some people need to hypnotize themselves and have an altered state of consciousness, almost a spiritual experience, a mystical experience where they are not in their body, because the body, of course, belongs to the external reality, to the real world. And so, and the body reminds the daydreamer that they are present here and now. So the need to disconnect from the body is very interesting. It reminds me of other dissociative experiences. For example, derealization, depersonalization is a dissociative experience where people do not experience the reality as real or themselves as real. So we see an overlap, a relationship between maladaptive daydreaming and dissociative phenomena. And our research supports that. We found when we look at correlations, statistical correlations between maladaptive daydreaming and dissociation, we find significant correlations. So this is probably a construct, a mental construct that belongs to dissociation, where people are creating some disconnections between different mental functioning. So we are not talking here about the connection to food itself, but food in this particular question represents a grounding to the external reality. So people don't eat because eating is one way to be grounded in the body and external reality, and they want the opposite. They want to disconnect from the body and into the fantasy world. So this is how food is connected here.
Yes, they are refusing food, like refusing the reality itself.
Yes, but not forever. Food is a distraction because it connects to the reality and interferes with the fantasy.
Yes.
But of course, with this example, we can see how maladaptive daydreaming can have health consequences, because it can interfere with sleep and interfere with eating. And also the stereotypical movement can also cause orthopedic problems. If a person, for example, walks back and forth for hours, this can cause some problem in the feet. So this is what people are reporting.
That's remarkable. Yeah. Today, TV and social media tend to show success as easy, especially in artistic fields. Does the modern culture influence maladaptive daydreaming, creating a gap between expectations and reality?
Well, to prove that, we will have to compare maladaptive daydreaming across cultures. So to compare traditional cultures who are not exposed to the media and with modern Western cultures. That will be difficult study to conduct because most of our studies, all of them, are conducted online. So anybody who is connected online is already exposed to the internet. So
yes,
even if we sample people from traditional countries, if they are online, that means that they're exposed. So it's a difficult question to answer. I think the question refers specifically to fantasies about success, comparing oneself to celebrities. But this is one specific form of daydreaming, one specific form of fantasy, of having unlimited success, like, you know, as a singer or as a performing artist and so on. But a lot of the daydreamers are not related to success. So I don't think that the disorder itself is associated with that. So, for example, many people report that the daydreaming is more concerned with compensating for emotional needs that they have. So of course, some people have a need for recognition. I understand that. But but many others, for example, would daydream about relationships, about idealized families, to compensate for something they never had. But still others daydream about they are not even present in the daydream. They would daydream about complete fantasies, about worlds, imaginary worlds that, like Harry Potter type fantasy worlds, or science fiction fantasy worlds. So, and they are unrelated to success in the media. So I think that the contents of maladaptive daydreaming is a fascinating issue to explore, and the contents and what is happening is absolutely related to the emotional and psychological needs of the person, and that varies from person to person.
Yes, and that actually was my next question. If there is a correlation between the content of the maladaptive daydreaming and the real life, for example, feeling powerless and daydreaming about being a superhero, or as you said, not having a good family and daydreaming about the perfect one.
Yes, yes. I think there is such a relationship. We just completed writing up a new research paper on this topic, and we found evidence that certain personality traits are associated with specific motives and themes in daydreaming. For example, people with social anxiety sometimes would compensate themselves and comfort themselves by imagining themselves as socially very popular and easygoing with others. People who have narcissistic needs would imagine themselves as very powerful and controlling and influential. People with attachment needs would tend to fantasize themselves in secure attachments where they're being loved and being taken care of. So there is such a relationship. Yes, absolutely. Still, for others, I mean, not everybody who daydreams excessively necessarily has deep underlying issues. As we already agreed, the experience is so rewarding that maybe anybody is at risk, who has it, is at risk of getting addicted to it, because it is accessible, it is legal, it is free, and it is very much, it is a lot of fun. This is what they tell me, because I don't have this ability.
All right. So then the last question is this: do you have any suggestion for people who suffer from maladaptive daydreaming? What can they do
Okay, so people who
to
suffer
improve
from
themselves?
Yeah. So first of all, as you indicated, you're talking about people who suffer from it. A lot of people don't see this as a problem, don't have distress, and are okay with the little price that they pay socially or in terms of concentration. But those who suffer from it deserve help. And what sort of help? So first of all, because I agree with your definition of maladaptive daydreaming as a mental addiction, as a behavioral addiction. So I think the first idea is to consult with an expert who has some experience with behavioral addictions, like gambling or sexual addiction or other habits, smoking, nail biting. And these are examples of habits that some people are disturbing, and there are people who have gained experience in helping people gain better control over these habits or addictions, if you will. So that's number one. Number two has to do with the nature of the daydreaming itself. So the nature of daydreaming is about not being present in external reality. So if people really want to be more present, one skill that we have evidence that could be helpful is mindfulness. Mindfulness training is a skill that teaches people how to be better aware of the external reality that includes their body, their thoughts, but also what their senses are perceiving. So addiction therapy, mindfulness skills, and the third component of this therapy is to explore if there are underlying issues. Because addiction has been conceptualized in the literature sometimes as a self-medication for other issues. Addiction to alcohol, to drugs, to gambling is camouflaging and covering up other issues. Addiction to food. So addiction to daydreaming could also, in some cases, serve as a way to regulate emotional pain, emotional memories, or other issues. And before you take away the self-medication, you need to offer another
a better medication.
A better medication, a better way of coping. Yeah. So some of the underlying issues must be resolved. If the underlying issues are complex, like childhood trauma and childhood neglect, the therapy could be not very short. But again, just taking away the self-medication is sometimes not enough. So these are the four components that I suggest.
Okay, thank you very much. So that was my last question. So, well, your speech was really inspiring. So I really want to thank you for this interview and for all the work you have done all these years to help people with maladaptive daydreaming. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
So I hope to see you again very soon.
Okay, my pleasure. Bye-bye.